So how do we do that? I'm going to talk about tail spend here because that's the area of focus for today. So let us assume two axes, X and Y. Let's assume this to be the spend in dollars. Let's assume that the product that they bought was $10,000, $100,000. Let's assume, it's all assumptions, and the lowest can be $1. So this is their spend range for a particular product. And let's try to understand what are the products that they have. So I'm going to talk about my industry here. In MRO, we have, let's say, a machine A and a machine B. Each one is costing $10,000. And I have 10 machine A in my Asian region. So I'm going to have 100,000 here for A, and I'm going to have 90,000 for B. Let's imagine I have a huge spend for motors because I'm in such an industry. I have 70,000 for motors. I have 60,000 for pumps. And there are smaller parts. This could vary from domain to domain. So let's, in my domain, we have nuts and bolts, we have fasteners, let's say 3K, 4K. So this is the spend for each product. So once we understand how much they spend for each product, we can try to arrange it in a descending order to see how the spend goes. Let's do that. But before we do that, I just want to give you an idea. This will definitely change from industry to industry. For HR and travels, you may not be able to do this because most of the services, you might not be able to do the same spend analysis I'm going to do right now. You'll understand as I go ahead. But in facilities management, in other similar domains, we can try to chart out what are the products that are being transferred. So let's take this case and let's say 10,000 for A. I'm just going to plot out a figure, 90,000 for B. Let's say I have pumps, motors, valves, it's PVFs, maybe it's in the mining industry, a few other things. And then I have a lot of valves, fasteners, lubricants, sanitary products, chemicals, and it stops there. So this is what I get. I get a curve. I'm only interested in the curve, I'm not going to pinpoint any number over here. But the whole point is to understand how is the curve for your client. If you get the spend sheet, is the client having a long tail in the end because they have a lot of spend which is are not cannibalized, or are they pretty consolidated with only high spend and it's pretty short? So what we try to understand here is how long is the tail of your client. If you have a long tail, yes, you can do a tail spend management idea. You can recommend that you can go ahead with that. So first you need to justify to your client that they have a long tail. So what is the tail anyways? So I'm just going to assume that there's a drop eventually, and then I have a long segment which is a low spend. It could be low or high volume, depends on the product. So I'm going to take this as my core spend area. I'm going to look at it as my segment A, which is the maximum spend. And I'm going to look at the rest of it as my tail spend. So this is my tail spend. Yeah, sure.
Could you please define how did you, zero into that cutoff for the tail spend?
Exactly. So actually, once we do this, we need to find a threshold, because when we communicate this, we need a fixed line. I'm going to say that below this is my tail spend, above this is not my tail spend. So how do you come up with this line? There are two ways of going about this. It depends on the spend sheet. If you find a dip in your spend sheet, suppose you see that you have a lot of high equipment and then you see it suddenly goes low, and majority of the spend in one region is below, say, $10,000. You have a lot of spend. So you can identify the range where the spend starts to fall and take a median, because this is based on approximation in order to understand what are we going to take as tail spend. But there are two things we need to keep in mind here. How mature is your client in terms of procurement? Are they in the nascent stage? Because when you decide the tail spend, you're basically deciding a number below which you're going to try to consolidate your spend. So let's assume that you have A spend, which is core and critical, which has a lot of contracts with core suppliers, and you're trying to identify a region called tail spend because you want to address this segment and you want to make them consolidated eventually. That's the plan, right? Now they might already have a lot of strategies for their core spend because it takes up, let's say, 70% of their spend, and let's say 30% of the spend comes here. What about the region where you're not sure where it falls? You don't want to leave anything unaddressed. So the one thing could be you could try to take critical products from your medium range into your A spend by putting them into flexible contracts, if possible. That's not certain. So include this region in your tail spend so that we can have an attractive segment for an integrator. So the whole strategy is going to depend on having an attractive sector for your integration, because no integrator wants to come and take up this part over here because it's like $10, $20. So we're going to actually do this in detail. But to answer your question, how do we take this number? It's based on the curve of the spend levels. It also depends on the maturity of the company and the number where you think is a workable number. You don't want to take up a number which is $3,000 for a company that spends so much and has done nothing for consolidation, because it's really not feasible. You're not going to address much if you just take this as your tail spend. You're just going to have this much spend here which is unaddressed. So So you don't want that.
Do you have any theoretical frameworks written by thought leadership in this space and things like that?
Yes.
Who talks about tail spend should be 10% of your this spend or something like that, and start using that as a benchmark?
What percent should be your tail spend? Now this will definitely depend on your industry of focus. So for MRO we say a range, it's a very wide range. We say 15 to 25 is ideal. But that will also depend on the nature of the products you bought. So we looked at our client and we saw that if you see the tail spend, it comes to around say 30% of the spend. And I said once they had 48,000 suppliers, right? Around 30,000 suppliers were just getting to this and the rest 18,000 were getting to this. It's like your 80-20 rule. So basically, let's have some clarity in your spend here. Let's try to make this consolidated. And no one is going to come and take the whole thing and give it to you in one shot. There's no indicator like that. So let's see how we can handle that. So that's what the strategy basically does. And coming back to this, once we identify the tail spend, let's assume that we have taken a value for your tail spend. Let's assume this line for now. And let's say that anything below $7,000 is going to be my tail spend. And the highest I spend is 100,000, right? So this itself is 70% of your spend. Anything below this is 30% of your spend. So the fifth thing, once you identify the threshold, is to break it down to segments. Now it is very important that you keep your client in the loop. What we did is that once we identified the number, for us we took 5,000 because it was more realistic. We asked him, is this a number that you could work with in the future? Do you think that this is a number below which all your low value, low volume products come? Though we had seen it in the spend sheet, we wanted him to sign off that number. He was like, perfect, go ahead, do the analysis. So break it up. What I mean by break it up, let's break this segment into 3. Let's call this B segment, C segment, and D segment. Now, you might think, how do you break it up, right? Now, this is your core spend, so we're not going to touch this right now. So this together is your tail spend. Now, this can be based on, the breakup of this is pretty biased. Let's say that this is $0. So this could be 0 to 500, this could be 500 to 1,000, and this could be 1,000 to 5,000. Let's assume that it's 5,000. Now, it's not equal. Now, the reason why I took it like this for my report is because when I did spend analysis, I found out that this was 5 million, this was 5 million, and this was like 13 million. So what I found out was C plus D is almost equal to the B. I don't want to take up a 2 and an 8 and whatever the balance is, because I want to make this pretty attractive too. My strategy is going to revolve around making this segment consolidated. That's the whole strategy. People are ready to take up this and consolidate it because it's pretty attractive. There is like $10 million here. But these products would be unclassified spend, misclassified spend which is outside the radar of the normal procurement operations of the company. And most companies, they do strategies that can help them save money here because it's majority of the spend. But at some point, they need to squeeze out the last drop. There's a saying that says the maximum savings come from the area with the lowest purchases. So we would need to start address the spend which is normally not addressed. So the breakup is pretty simple. It's to identify a range and analyze each range separately. Let's get separate contract models and separate SLAs for each of these segments with our integrators so that we can leverage maximum savings. Now this is because our client, let's just look at a typical case, and this is common to most industries. Their B segment spend was more or less through global distributors who are nationwide. They have most of these products, it's pretty common stuff, and they need it pretty often, so they've signed up contracts with them. And the C segment was basically with global distributors and regional providers. Regional